Previously on the Fan of History, Ashurnasirpal II of Assyria rules the Near East. Everyone has been beaten, everyone is in fear of the great king. He has achieved the goal of his father and grandfather and have total victory. In the other side of the world, China suffered barbarian invasions but beat back the Western wrong barbarians. So, welcome to the Fan of History. I am the Fan of History and these are the events of the 860s BC. This is a long one, but I decided not to split it up and I hope it works. Please watch the videos, The Great Civilizations of the World in 900 BC and all the previous decade reports of the 9th century BC. So, Ashurnasirpal II is Ashur's chosen king. And he doesn't have any targets to campaign against. Everyone is paying their tribute and the tribute is heavy. They have to pay a lot. His enemies, everybody who's paying tribute to him actually, are now waiting for a weaker king. And his army is consisting of restless veterans. He has been campaigning for 13 years. So we have to talk about these Aramean Neo-Hittite states. You know, I mentioned them before. I talked about Bit-Adini, Bit-Simani, Karkemish, Aram, Damascus and Hamath, but there are more of them, and these are actually just the ones in Syria and Anatolia. There are even more of them in southern Mesopotamia and at other places, but these are the ones we're going to talk about. They actually managed to write Aramean for this time, at about this time, and it is written with the Phoenician alphabet. We'll have to talk about all of these states now because they will become important in the next decade. So let's go quickly through the others. There are, yeah, this is the list. I'll talk more about them in the 850s. You can't find Tabal, Kilaku on this map because they're further north in Mesopotamia. In Anatolia, sorry. We'll talk about the Bit Agusi here, and we'll remind ourselves of the Bit Samani because we talked about the Bit Samani quite a bit before. So the Bit Agusi have been around since about 1000 BC as Yatan or Bit Yatan. They were actually mentioned by Ashurabi II. I didn't talk about that. It was right before 1000 BC, I think. They did flee west from Ashurdan II during one of his campaigns that are poorly documented. Their king at this point is Gusi, who's actually renamed the tribe to the Bit Agusi, and they have this area here, close to the Euphrates. And you remember this was the way Ashurnasirpal walked to the Mediterranean. And these Karkemish, Bit-Adini, all of them are paying tribute, as are the Bit Agusi right now. So, and the Bit Samani was the tribe that contained Ambal-A. Remember, he was the guy who couldn't come to Ashurnasirpal's party in 879 BC. Ashurnasirpal put his brother Han on the throne in 879, and he received massive tribute from the Bit Samani. Their capital is a town called Armedu. It's not on this map, sadly, but Bit Samani is up here. And Assyria is far, far to the east here. This is the Euphrates, and Assyria is centered on the Tigris. But Assyria is now reaching this area because of all the wars of Ashurnasirpal. Ashurnasirpal has moved the capital further north, actually, to Kala. And we talked about this. There was an enormous canal project, and this is still ongoing. Even though it's now 9 years since the greatest party of all time, construction is still going on, and the city is not finished. So, during the years 869 to 867 BC, Ashurnasirpal is building the capital, collecting tribute from everyone and being scary. And nobody dare oppose him. In India, everything is hard to date. There is no writing, etc. I talked about this before. But in the next show, I will actually have something to report about India. And if you know anything about Indian history that I don't know, if you know any great sources, etc., tell me, because I want to mention India. There is civilization going on here, and we should talk more about it. In 866 BC, nothing else, King Li shows his true colors. King Li is turning out to be a decadent and corrupt king. He is doing all those crazy things a king of China should not do. He is indulging in pleasures, he has bad habits, and he's raising the taxes. China is a mystery, but the nobles have beaten back the Western barbarians. So remember, the Sui dynasty rebelled against the Shang, and then they claimed that whoever has the mandate of heaven can make a successful rebellion. So does King Li still have the mandate of heaven, or is Sui China in deep, deep trouble? Well, in 866 BC, what everybody has been waiting for finally happens. Ashurnasirpal has to go on campaign again. The Bitsamani and Han has ceased to pay their tribute. But Ashurnasirpal goes northwest from the Euphrates, and maybe as a feint. And there is the tribe of the Kumuk. And they get really scared when the Assyrian royal army shows up. They pay their tribute, they increase their tribute. Please get away from us, Ashurnasirpal. And Ashurnasirpal does, because his target is the Bitsamani. And well, as everybody knew by this time, it's a bad idea not to do what Ashurnasirpal wants to do. The Bitsamani is over here. He's coming from over here. He went this way, and then he took Bitsamani. And it might have been a very hard fought victory, because the Bitsamani survives. They pay even more tribute. They get a new vassal king. We don't know what happened to Han. And in this final victory, the people of the mountains to the north, traditionally called the Nairi, are beginning to take notice. They have already received punishment from the Assyrians many a time, but now Assyria is stronger than it has ever been, perhaps even stronger than during the time of Tiglath-Pileser I. And there is a man among the Nairi who's called Arame or Aramu, and he might actually be the reason for the name Armenia. And he wants to do something about the Assyrian threat. Meanwhile, Nabu-Apla-Iddina is some sort of wizard in Babylon. Remember, he sent his brother to fight the Assyrian army. His brother was a prisoner of Ashurnasirpal. But Ashurnasirpal never strikes back. So maybe he's paying massive tribute, we don't know. But Babylon is having a great time. Nabu-Apla-Iddina is restoring justice. He's reclaiming lost things. He's fighting the Arameans who are still doing barbaric stuff around Babylon. And the Babylonian military is getting rebuilt, which you would think Ashurnasirpal would have an opinion on. There's a literary revival. There are 2 important texts that get fresh editions. And actually Nabu-Apla-Iddina sent Babylonian scribes to work for Ashurnasirpal in Kala. Maybe that's part of the tribute. The Era Epic is a great work of Babylon, and it's sometimes dated to this reign. It is probably from the 9th century BC. But we're not going to talk about the Era Epic today, because we are going to talk about the Sun God Tablet, one of the most famous artifacts of late Babylonia. This is the Sun God Tablet. It was recovered from Sippar in 1881. That is close to Babylon in what is today Iraq. It is in the British Museum because, as you know, the British took everything in the 19th century. It's only 29 times 17 centimeters. And the guy who is huge to the right is Shamash, the sun god of Babylon. And the guy in the middle is supposed to be Nabu-Apla-Iddina. There is a story in these letters that you see everywhere. And it tells the story about how Sippar and the sun god temple was lost to the Arameans. And they stole his statue. But Nabu-Apla-Iddina has driven out the Arameans, restored the temple. I think he didn't find the statue, but he built a new statue. And the other two people on the tablet is the goddess Ah in the front and an important priest. So this you should look at if you're ever in London. In Mexico, the Olmecs are doing very well. They are trading a lot and they are actually getting more and more prosperous. They lost their old center, but now they are in La Venta and things are looking great for the Olmecs. In 865, Ashurnasirpal finally finishes his great city. And some sources actually have the greatest party of all time at this time. But I think that is projecting modern senses to the ancient world, because for us it's natural to have a party when something is done. But I think Ashurnasirpal's party was really in 879 BC, especially since he stole some citizens from the party guests. So what now remains for Ashurnasirpal to do? He has beaten all the enemies. There are no more rebellions. The tributes are heavy. Assyria is swimming in gold. Well, he appoints a heir. Shalmaneser III is a son of Ashurnasirpal and another one in the ancient line of kings. And I can only imagine what it was like to be his heir. Shalmaneser is an interesting guy and we're going to talk a lot about him, but imagine this situation. Your father is the most fearsome individual in the whole world and everybody is mad at him, but they don't dare do anything because they're just waiting for him to die so they can do it to you instead. So it will take a lot to be the heir and take over Assyria at this time. In 860 BC, Tyre builds a new Egyptian harbor. Tyre is the leading city among the Phoenician cities. It's up here, there. There's increased trade with Egypt, and that trade usually goes to Byblos, so Byblos might not like this. Ithobal, sometimes named Ethbal, is the king of Tyre. And before he usurped the throne, he was a priest of the goddess Astarte. And he's a very religious person then. He paid tribute to Ashurnasirpal when Ashurnasirpal visited the sea, and he's probably still paying tribute to Ashurnasirpal. He's a close ally to Israel, and as we said before, he was so close that he married his daughter to the king of Israel, Ahab. So let's talk about that daughter. Jezebel, the queen of Israel. She's the first strong female in our narrative. And I wish I could talk more about women in these shows, but there's simply no information. So I will grasp at whatever I can find. Jezebel gets a lot of hate. And searching for her image was really interesting. There was no image of Ithobal. I tried to find one, but there were a lot of images of Jezebel, and this is probably not the very correct one. Ahab, her husband, the king of Israel, was a Baal worshipper before he met her. And he's into Phoenician religion, as is she. And she gets the blame for every pagan thing that's happening in Israel. Her name means something like, "Where is the prince?" which is a ritual cry for Baal. There are a lot of biblical stories about Jezebel, and I was going to relate them to you, but then I read that they are incredibly wrong. They are inconsistent and anachronistic. Some example is that 1 Kings 20 states that Ben-Hadad, the king of Aram, invaded Samaria. Aram is Damascus then, during Ahab's reign, but that didn't happen until later. And 2 Kings 3:9 refers to king of Edom, but the Edom didn't have a monarchy until 100 years later. And the stories about Jezebel are written about 200 years later. So yeah, But one thing she does in the Bible is that she's promoting worship of Phoenician gods, whereas Elijah, the great prophet, is promoting Yahweh, and they butt heads all the time. It's really Team Baal versus Team Yahweh, and that will lead to some events that I am gonna think are historical, but they are for a later show. So remember Jezebel, the strong pagan queen of Israel. So what is Ashurnasirpal up to during these 5 years? Well, Assyria is at peace. There is a final campaign, but no details come down to us, so we don't know what he did. But I'm sure he won. The trade networks are growing bigger. The roads and other infrastructure is great in Assyria. Trade is actually booming, and there are fortified depots being built for the armies. There are deportations of potentially hostile tribes to other places of Assyria. Remember, Ashurnasirpal placed Assyrians on the Mediterranean coast. Assyria is really strong, and Ashurnasirpal rules the world. The Shavin, I don't have anything new to say here. We'll come back to them when they reach their peak. In Europe, things are starting to stir. The Villanovans, we talked about them. Greece is formally still in the Dark Age until 800 BC. And you should check out the Greece in the early 9th century video that I did. But the Greeks are soon gonna start to do something. We're going to talk about very, very, very small Greek policies, city-states. Very soon, actually in the next show we are going to do that. But when you think of a Greek city-state at this time, it's more like a village. The Phoenicians are colonizing, we don't really know where except in Spain. And this is actually the age where the ceremonial golden hats are created among the Urnfield culture. But yeah, well, let's not talk about them. So what about Egypt? Well, Egypt is a mess. So Takelot II takes over in the south, ruling as the high priest of... No, not ruling as the high priest of Amun. That was in the 21st century. The 21st dynasty. He is ruling as the pharaoh in the south. Of the 23rd dynasty, Osirkons II still rules in the north for the 22nd dynasty. And the 24th dynasty and the Libu 23rd and a half dynasty are waiting in the wings, ready to spring on us to increase this mess. Pi! Save us from this mess. What? 100 years? Okay, Pi will save us from this mess, but he won't do it until much later, sadly. I promised you I would talk about the Silk Road, and first I was discouraged because the Silk Road really grows into the Silk Road we know and love in the Han Dynasty about 200 BC. But there are a lot of trade contacts between the West and the East long before that. One of the reasons was that the grassland steppes of Asia enabled merchants to travel a long way without encroaching on any agricultural lands, thus not causing hostility. In 2000 BC, we have found jade that was traded from China to Badakhstan over the mighty Pamir Mountains. There are also some mummies from the 1600 BC that look very Western, and they are in the East. We have found samples of silk that could be Chinese silk in Egypt in 1070 BC, so trade is happening. And trade between the East and West will increase with the Scythian expansion in the 8th century BC, and then even more when the Persians show up, and then finally the Han Dynasty. But the Silk Road is happening, and the amber from the Baltic is actually going all the way from the Baltic to China. So, in 860 BC, the guy I mentioned at the start of the show, Arame, he unites the tribes of the Nairi into a country, into a state called the Urartu. And the direct cause of this is the power of Ashurnasirpal. They know that they are next. Assyria will claim the mountains. And this country is a mountain fortress, very rich in natural resources and rich in iron. And the Assyrians have been here since the time of Shalmaneser I in the 13th century BC. But now Urartu will control access to the steppes to the north. It will become a major headache for Assyria. They will be very inspired by Assyria. They will be using Assyrian language for writing at the start. And they will be using Assyrian tactics, Assyrian politics. Their main god is Kaldi, the god of war, and they probably call themselves the Kaldini. So they are ruled by a war god, just like the Assyrians. So Aramean Armenians, are the Urartians the Armenians? Well, I'm gonna let that question linger because there are divided opinions on it. So we'll get back to that question. So all you Armenians out there, you just have to wait, I'm sorry. So my next episode will be events of the 850s BC. In the 850s BC, Ashurnasirpal, oh my god, I wrote the wrong name. That guy is not showing up yet. Actually, he hasn't done it yet because Ashurbanipal was... there's just one of him. We are getting closer to the Battle of Karkar, which will be the biggest battle in all time at its date. I will release this show about the 850s BC on July the 14th. And you can discuss the show with me on YouTube, Facebook. I want you to subscribe, like and share if you can, because that's what keeps me going. I'm having a lot of fun doing these things, but if nobody's interested, I might just have to stop. But you are interested, I know that, and thank you for that. And thank you for watching.